And then, so as this is recording, this is for you to guys go back through. If at any time you guys have a question, please unmute yourself and ask. I will not take offense to you interrupting me. That's just how we get things done here in the virtual world. So it's not like I can see you guys raising your hand. So just unmute yourself. You don't have to turn on your screen, turn on your video. Just let me know what you guys are curious about or what questions you have. All right, can everybody see this shared screen right here? Hopefully so. So as we go into this, we're gonna go over some of the general characteristics. I want you guys to know a couple things here. A lot of it I'm going to keep basic, and we'll save some of the in-depth, like mind-boggling stuff for in person, because I think that that's a little bit helpful. Like I said before, whenever it comes to the nervous system, do not expect yourself to know everything right away. With the nervous system, it's so complex and beautiful. I can tell you from personal experience, I've taken about 4 anatomy classes and additional certifications just to understand what even I know about the nervous system. And I know that I only know the tip of the iceberg, okay? Some things that I'm gonna pull in here is something called neurokinetic therapy. It actually has a lot to do with this motor pathways that we'll discuss. And different certifications like that really, really helped me to grasp it. So never think that this is like, oh my God, there's so much information. I'm never gonna know what to do. If this interests you, please seek out other resources because they are there and they are beautiful. As we go through here, if you have any questions, again, please unmute yourself. That will help me out a lot. All right, so the CNS, do we remember what that is? The central nervous system, right? Communicates with those peripheral body structures through pathways. So pathways, they basically, they're highways for messages, right? They're pathways, they're how we communicate. They conduct either sensory or motor information. So you know how we talked about how we have the posterior horn, anterior horn, all those different things where, you know, we have some of it being sensory, some of it being motor. Pathways, they conduct both. They have the capacity to conduct both. They're processing and integrating continuously. So it's not one of those things where we have to pause one thing to start another. It's constantly happening. It's the beauty of the nervous system, but actually it makes it harder for us to learn, right? Because it's not like we can have an on and off switch. It's a continual flow. It's a continual process. As we travel through the white matter of the brain stem or the spinal cord, and as they connect to the central nervous regions with the cranial nerve and spine, we kind of get those messages traveling from that brain stem all the way out through those cranial and spinal nerves, some of them that we discussed last time, out into the world of our fingertips, our muscles, our sensory receptors in our skin, and more. So it's a continuous and constant process. Again, that makes it harder on us because it's not like we can be like, okay, pause, you know, pause that thought and we'll come back to it, or let me understand what you did before we go on to the next thing. It's literally a constant thing that does not shut off. The CNS pathways consist of tracts. Tracts are bundles of axons, and nuclei, clusters of cell bodies. So that's what they're made of, tracts and nuclei. Again, these definitions are good to put down on your note cards. Ascending pathways. These are sensory because they carry sensory information from the body to the brain. Kind of makes sense, right? I always think of it this way. I'm touching something hot. Ascending pathway, it's going up through my brain, my spinal cord to my brain, correct? So it kind of makes sense. Don't overthink it. And then a descending pathway are motor because they transmit that motor information from the brain to the muscle and glands. So basically that ascending pathway shared with my brain, hey, that's hot, stop doing that, take your hand off, Fu. And then my muscles reacted after that motor pathway. Descending pathway told my bicep, you better flex and fire to get that hand off of the stove. So neuron component location. Neuron cell bodies are in the peripheral ganglia. Remember those ganglia? Those are the little, they're almost like nodes or nodules just outside the spinal cord on either side. Those cell bodies, they're in that ganglia, spinal grain horns, or brain nuclei. Neuron axons are in the tracts of the brain and spinal cord. So again, these are the two components that make up the pathways, and this is where they are located. Tracts are paired. Any given pathway exits on both the left and the right side. It means exactly what it said. So tracts, they're paired. You get a left and a right shooting off, and those pathways and those messages are going out and coming in. 2 or more neurons are involved. The pathway consists of chains of neurons. So if you think of it this way, you know, we have tracts and neurons, right? Those are the two components of these pathways. Whenever it comes to the neurons, there are at least 2 or more involved. They're like a chain. I think of it kind of like, you know, whenever we have a chain now at the farm around the fence post connecting our gate to the post. If those chains were not connected all the way around, we wouldn't have a locked gate, right? And then the gate would swing open. Same here, if there was a break in the chain, we would not be able to have those messages being sent, and those pathways would be blocked. So that's something, if that helps your visual mind, feel free to use that. Sensory pathways have primary and secondary neurons. Motor pathways have upper and lower motor neurons. So again, little nuances here, but that's just the way the nervous system is. Sensory, we have primary and secondary neurons, whereas motor has upper and lower motor neurons. Okay, clear as mud? Now, most pathways cross so that the brain processes information about the contralateral opposite side of the body. So we've always heard the left and right brain, right? But this is where this comes into play, talking about our pathways. The left brain processes the right body information. The right brain processes the left body information. It always mind boggles people, especially new students who've never taken anatomy. Why would this happen? All that fun stuff, don't worry, we'll break some more down. But all that you need to remember and get into your mind is this contralateral aspect. Left brain processes the right side of the body, right brain processes the left side of the body. Most pathways exhibit body mapping referred to as, has anybody ever heard of these little kind of drawings that kind of map what corresponding regions of the cortex respond to the different aspects of your body? Have you ever seen those little homunculus drawings? It's kind of what we're diving into right here. But whenever we do this body mapping, and as we go through this, we'll see how everything's connected, but also how, I want to say random. I don't know if it's just me, but audio seems to be broken up quite a bit. Anybody else having issues with that? Unmute yourself or type in group chat, because I need to know that. Anybody?
Yeah, it's breaking up a little bit.
Okay. Like I said, I will have this recorded.
It just started, yeah.
Okay. I wonder why. Checking on my end, I have good clearance as far as, thanks for letting me know, Jake. On my end, I have good connection. All that I can do is say that this recording will be online. And like I say, we're not going to go into everything tonight, so that'll help us out. Okay, sorry, guys. Plus, some of you are moving, so sometimes it'll go in and out if you guys are moving. If you're staying still, apologies. My computer says that I have good connection, but we're at the mercy of the good Lordy's virtual technology and internet. So, all right, so let's keep on going here. Thank you, Jake. Sensory pathways. So remember, sensory, that's what you're sensing from your extremities or from the skin, from the motors, from the glands, and information that is traveling to your brain and spinal cord. So the sensory pathways ascend, makes sense, right? Ascending pathway, and conduct information about limb position, touch, temperature, pressure, and pain. There are two different types of properties that I want you guys to know, the stomato and the visceral. So these are different processes, but they process the stimuli from the skin, muscle, and joints versus the viscera. And that's the only thing that separates those two. It kind of matches whenever you're talking about the viscerosensory pathway. Guess what? It receives from the viscera. So at least those two match. The stomato, that is coming from our skin, muscles, and joints. It kind of makes sense, right? Though it, like you're getting stimulated, you're getting some sort of sensory touch. So stomato, that's where we get that from, okay? So again, sensory pathways have two different pathway processes similarly. Here's a beautiful chart for our chart people in the class. A series of 2 or 3 neurons relay sensory information up to the brain. Primary, secondary, tertiary. These guys are here for you, and yes, they will be a part of this recording and everything that you need to know. I'm really hoping that this is still recording. If not, we'll make it work. Yeah, it still is. Okay, good. Next up, so we're going to talk about the functional anatomy. This is those stomatosensory pathways. So remember how that was for the skin, muscles, that stuff. So this is where we're pulling this from, okay? These are fun words, so you guys can laugh with me. Posterior funiculus and the medial lemniscus pathway. Ugh, yeah. Anterolateral pathway and the Spinocerebellar Pathway. So these are 3 of the major pathways that are specifically stomatosensory. So specifically from things like the skin, the muscle, the joints. So I know that we're getting into like a bunch of branches of a tree right now. You started out with 2 things, and then those 2 things branched off into 2 more things, and then 3 more things. I suggest that you either map this out on a notepad or, again, trusty old note cards. Pull those guys up. I will also have some additional YouTube videos for you to watch so you can visualize and see it on the screen, okay? So, looking at the actual spinal cord itself, where are all of these beautiful structures located? So, the PF and ML pathway, those are in that posterior aspect. You see those popped up. If you're driving, don't look down. Okay, you can see it later. The spinocerebellar, they're more lateral. And then that anterolateral, they're still lateral, but then they're anterior as well. Kind of matches with their name. So that posterior is on the back side and it's medial. The cerebral, the spinocerebellar is on the side, so it's lateral. And then that anterolateral pathway is on the anterior plus a section on the lateral portion of the spinal cord. Here is another beautiful chart for you to check out whenever you are at home in the comfiness of your couch. You have sensory pathways, and it's just a breakdown of the different portions. Now, a lot of this will not be on your exam. However, it is good to know whenever you dive into future anatomy classes, because they probably will make you dive into this. Of course, we have the anterolateral and the spino pathway as well. So let's break it down. So the posterior funiculus pathway and medial lemniscal pathway projects to the spinal cord, brainstem, and dicephalon. So before terminating at the cerebral cortex, which will break down these terms a little bit more, so don't get too overwhelmed. The spinal cord tract is the posterior funiculus, and then the brainstem is the medial. It carries information about limb position, discriminative touch, precise pressure, and vibration. Why do you need to know this? Because whenever you're dealing, especially with a brain trauma patient or anybody who has had like a spinal cord injury, you need to know what's going on where. Why can they not discriminate between a 2-point touch? Why can they not feel vibration? Things of that nature. Can they feel vibration? Great. What's the next pathway that we need to be addressing and looking at? So this pathway, uses a 3-neuron train. So remember, they have at least 2. The primary neuron courses through the spinal cord, posterior root, and posterior funiculus. This has different aspects to it that you don't need to know right now. I want you to know that the primary neuron courses through the spinal nerve, posterior root, and posterior funiculus. The secondary neuron cell body is going towards the medulla oblongata, which we'll break that one down as well. Tertiary neurons, they're going to the thalamus. Any questions on that stuff? I know right now it's all words, but don't worry, there will be some YouTube links to follow. Let's break down a few more things before I let you go. So this is a great, again, if you're driving, don't look, but there is a great chart / picture that is linked in this PowerPoint. It has kind of a pictorial demonstration of what is going on in the brain, in the spinal cord, and just kind of breaks down cerebrum, midbrain, medulla oblongata, and spinal cord. What's going on, where it's going, what's going on in this posterior pathway. So check this out if you get a chance whenever you get home, especially if you're a visual learner. This will help you read and match where things are occurring and why, okay? Anterior lateral pathway. So this one is located in the anterior and lateral. Guess what? That makes sense. The white portion of the spinal cord, and it is composed of 2 different tracts. Again, making a branch, making a picture on your notepad would probably help with this. Anterior and lateral tracts, just to make it easy. Conducts information to crude touch, pressure, pain, and temperature. So if we go back, the posterior funiculus was talking about limb position, discriminative touch, precision, pressure, and vibration. That's good to know. And guess what else is good to know? That the anterior lateral pathway talks about crude touch, pressure, pain, and temperature. Good things to know. Primary neuron synapse and the secondary neurons in the posterior horn of the spinal cord. Axons of the secondary neuron cross to the opposite side and anterior white common suture of the spinal cord and ascend to the thalamus. What in the world does that mean? So as the secondary neuron, remember there's a chain that we talked about, how neurons have chains. In that secondary neuron, they actually pass through and go to the opposite side of the spinal cord. And then it ascends up into that thalamus. Again, this might be like, oh my God, why do I have to know this? But it does help because then you know, okay, it's going to the opposite side. You can picture that message going up and out. Tertiary, so that's a 3rd aspect of this neuron chain, project to the primary somatosensory cortex. Again, don't look now if you are driving, but there's another beautiful picture describing and showing you what exactly is going on and where into the brain it heads. I like this one because you can see how it does cross over as it heads up into the thalamus. Alrighty, Spinocerebellar. So this guy conducts proprioception to the cerebellum. This is important for maintaining posture and coordinating movements. Again, we have 2 tracks, anterior, posterior. They do not use tertiary neurons. That means that we're only dealing with primary and secondary. Information conducted in the pathways is integrated and acted upon at a subconscious level. So that means that we don't even have to think about it, which is beautiful, right? This is happening in the background, if you want to think of it that way. We don't have to tell ourselves to do these actions. The body just does them. So this is a pathway that just happens without you knowing it. Again, another beautiful picture telling us what is going on and where. Alrighty. Breaking down a little bit more here, we're talking about the motor pathways. Motor pathways, they consist of cerebral nuclei, the cerebellum, descending tracts, and motor neurons. Remember, motor pathways descending, right? They're taking that information from the brain and putting it into our beautiful skin, muscles, and glands. 2 motor neurons are in that somatic motor pathway, upper and lower. Remember how we talked about one of them had an anterior and posterior, this one had the upper and lower? This is what we're talking about here. Cell body. So the cell body is housed in either, for the upper, so for the upper motor, the cell body is housed in the cerebral cortex or in the brainstem nucleus. The lower motor neuron is housed in either the anterior horn of the spinal cord or within a brainstem cranial nerve nucleus. What does that mean? Don't worry, there will be pictures to help you out there. But basically, where it's located helps you kind of determine, the activity where it projects to. So looking down a little bit more, you'll see a table later on if you're driving. You'll see that upper motor neuron, it's in the cerebral cortex and the brainstem nucleus. It actually projects to a lower motor neuron. May either be excitatory or inhibitory, so it could rev things up or calm things down. Lower motor neurons, again, that brainstem nucleus or the anterior horn of the spinal cord, projects to skeletal muscle. And it's excitatory only, which makes sense, right? Because especially whenever we're talking about motor, we're only going to be telling it what to do, right? So with this lower motor neuron, it's just going directly into that skeletal muscle and excitatory only. Alrighty, a couple more here and then I'll let you go. So the upper motor neuron excites or inhibits the lower motor neuron. So think about that as the first level, okay? And then that lower motor neuron is always excitatory, connecting directly into the skeletal muscle like we talked about. Motor neurons, axons, form 2 types of somatic motor pathways, woohoo. Direct pathway and indirect. So basically that means, do you have conscious control or not? Direct pathway, you have conscious control of that skeletal muscle activity, versus the indirect, it's an unconscious control, okay? So direct means conscious control, indirect, unconscious control, which we need both, right? Because sometimes we have to tell our bicep to contract or think about or something of that nature. Other than that, whenever we're touching our hot stove, we need almost that immediate response, or there's other situations that I'll point it to you later. So, direct pathway. This is also called, which is good to know, pyramidal pathway. Why? It originates in pyramidal cells of the primary motor cortex. And then it has axons that project to lower motor neurons in the brainstem and spinal cord, okay? Whenever we're breaking these down, Corticobulbar Tracts originate from the facial region. With this, within the motor homunculus, remember I used that word earlier, that pictorial demonstration of where things are happening and why from the spinal cord. This region, from this facial region within the motor homunculus of the primary motor cortex. So if you need to review that definition, please go back and review that. Axon synapses with lower motor neuron cell bodies housed within the brainstem are in that cranial nerve nuclei, okay? The axons of the lower motor neuron help to form cranial nerves. Whenever we break down cranial nerves here in a bit, I gave you guys that sheet. We're talking about different things like, can you smell? Do you feel touch here? Can you hear? Can you say, ah, things of that nature. So the axons from those lower motor neurons help to form the cranial nerves. This is key because if you remember correctly, the lower motor neurons are only excitatory. They only have that excitement factor, not the inhibitor factor. So again, it makes sense that that feeds into the cranial nerves because we have to have that in order to respond correctly. Okay, corticospinal tracts. So Those descend from the cerebral cortex and form bulges in the anterior medulla oblongata called pyramids. So we have those pyramidal tracts, right? So now you're kind of seeing the same trend. It descends in the spinal cord and synapses on lower motor neurons and anterior horn of the spinal cord. There are two sets of these tracts, lateral and anterior, okay? Lateral and anterior. We'll kind of talk a little bit more about this later, but these the lateral controlled skill movements of the limbs. So think lateral limbs, if that helps you. And then the anterior controls axial musculature. Again, axial, anterior. Start matching up these words if you can to make some sense of these different tracts and what they control, okay? Going on here, I'm going to go down to indirect pathways real quick. So indirect, do you remember how there was those direct pathways where you have conscious control versus indirect, so you don't have conscious control? This is unconscious control. The indirect pathways involve midbrain nuclei that govern subconscious motor activities. So subconsciously, this is happening. All these messages are being sent and received. The pathway's upper motor neurons originate in the brainstem and then takes complicated routes to the spinal cord tracts. The axons terminate on either inner neurons, so remember those are the in-between sensory and motor, or the lower motor neurons, which are only excitatory and lead to the skeletal muscle. This controls motor activity by exciting or inhibiting lower motor neurons. Clear as mud, right? Again, with the nervous system, just start getting familiar with the movements, or with the terms, excuse me, because it will kind of build on itself, as you can see here. So my recommendation to you is tonight I go through and I just start writing out key terms. I maybe would start organizing out, okay, here are the tracts, here are the clumps, here are the neurons, here's what makes up what, here's the branches of that family tree, just to start making sense of it, okay? Indirect pathways, so the lateral pathway regulates precise movements and tone and the flexor muscles of the limb. The medial pathway regulates tone and gross movements of the muscles of the head, neck, proximal limb, and trunk. So again, lateral pathways help with precise movements and tone in the flexor muscles of the limbs. Medial pathway regulates tone and gross movements of the muscles of the head, neck, proximal limb, and trunk. Whew, okay. Medial pathway, it has a lot more functions, right? So it makes sense, or sadly, they break it down into 3 groups of tracks, okay? So 3 different highways. We will start breaking these down in class because it helps us to kind of see things visually, and I don't want you guys to look at your phone if you're driving. So we'll come back to that, okay? I do want you to take a look at it though. If you can think of it, it's slide 28. And then there's also a graph that's on 29, but we will come back and revisit this, okay? Something else that we can chat about while you're listening to me is the role of the cerebral nuclei. So you probably heard this a couple times while I was talking, as well as maybe outside of this. But it is common to talk about just because it receives impulses from this entire cerebral cortex and limbic system. We will learn more about the limbic system later on, but just think about how important this bad boy is, that it receives impulses from the entire cerebral cortex. A lot of messages, right? A lot of impulses being made. So, good one to know about. Know what the role is. So this output goes primarily to the primary motor cortex, and it provides patterned background movements needed for conscious motor activity by adjusting motor commands issued by other nuclei. So think about motor commands during walking. So little fine-tuned movements, which I always find is interesting. I'm going to take a step back and kind of put on my athletic trainer hat here instead of just anatomy professor. Say if I'm looking at somebody and they are having problems, maybe they had a concussion, maybe they had a severe spinal injury or something thereof, maybe even just a hip injury, and we're looking at their gait walking or gait jogging. I want to call it a hiccup in your get up, okay? That's not the technical term, but you all know what I'm talking about whenever I say those words. It's kind of like there's just something off about those movements. There's something missing, like it's not smooth, it's not coordinated. There's something not fully connected in there. A lot of times this can go back to that cerebral cortex and limbic system connection and those pathways, because basically it's kind of like the fine tuning. We need those little extra little messages that happen in the background to help us do these functions. And so whenever we have people who have had, say, a sustained severe concussion, I think of a Union football player that I had the pleasure of working with and just observing. He was coming back from a major brain bleed. It was a Union football player. You might have seen it in the news, and he's out from football forever. But he had to relearn how to work, how to walk, how to run, how to lift, how to speak, all these different things. And the speaking came a little bit faster, but the walking took a little bit. And there was a little bit of a awkwardness to it at first, because all of those little bitty pattern background noises or that background music wasn't necessarily syncing up correctly. So that took time, that took healing, that took re-education of those muscles, of those nerves, of those pathways to get them back coordinated and a nice, beautiful, smooth walk, okay? So this does have functional application. We might not need to know those specific names in our respective passions or professions, but it is you need to know that that does occur and that these pathways do exist in the background that we need to make sure are functioning appropriately. So that's the role of the cerebral nuclei. Let's talk about the role of the cerebellum. You've probably heard of the cerebellum. It's a big thing. It's a big deal. The cerebellum continuously receives input from various sensory and motor pathways. So both sensory and motor pathways are going to this guy. Remember that. When the cerebellum detects a difference between the intended and actual movement, it generates an error correct signal. So think of it this way. Excuse me. Say, and this is going to be a very gross general example, but say I am carrying my groceries. I am carrying them from my car into my kitchen. In my front yard, in the front door step, I do have 2 steps to get up into my house. So there's one that kind of has a pad that kind of leads up to a pad, and then another one that is right in front of my door. So in my mind, I'm thinking, okay, lift your right foot up, step onto the front slab, and then maybe lift up your left foot, step onto the front step, right? I'm able to guesstimate due to either previous occurrence or just those previous motor pathways, if you want to call it, and also my visual assessment of where I'm going, how far I want to step, how far I need to step, how tall, how high I need to lift my foot. All these things are happening in a split second, right? And so say I misjudge, which I'm not saying happens frequently, but it does happen. I am human. And I catch my toe on that beautiful step in the front. Luckily, my reflexes kick in that we talked about last time, and I catch myself before falling on my face. However, think of it this way, as my cerebellum was like, oopsies. And so for that second step, it's going to be generating that error correcting signal for that second step. Now, this is just a gross generalization and just trying to put it in visual terms. So then it sends that error correcting signal. And it's like, okay, dude, lift your foot up a little bit higher. You need to adjust here, here, and here. Bam, I nail that second step and I walk into my house. Okay? It's kind of what we're dealing with here. Again, that's a gross picture of it. but that's kind of what happens in that process. The signal transmits to premotor and primary motor cortexes via the thalamus and the brainstem. These messages are then sent to motor neurons via descending tracts, which makes sense, right? Because we got to now get that error correcting signal back to the muscles to be like, okay, Fu, work a little bit harder, get that foot up, actually land on the step, not land on your face. Now we're good to go, okay? That's what's happening in a split second. Not right now, but later on. Check out slide number 33. These are the cerebral pathways. It's helpful to see this because you can see where messages are going to, where they're coming from, corrective feedback, where that's being sent, which is really important. Also, that integrative analysis piece is very good as well, but it mainly goes back to voluntary movements. We gotta assess those voluntary movements, make decisions, integrate that information, and then give it some feedback if it needs it, okay? So you can tell why that portion of the brain is so important, because we have to have that feedback loop. So simple reflexes, talking about reflexes, represent the lowest level of motor control. Nuclei controlling these reflexes are in the spinal cord and brainstem. Brainstem nuclei also participate in more complex reflexes. They might, like some brainstem nuclei, might oversee regulation of reflex centers elsewhere in the brain. So if you think about these as like command centers, instead of just like a basic reflex, it's more processes, it takes a higher level of cognitive thought or processing to integrate that reflex. That's where this is housed. Complex, unconscious motor patterns are controlled by neurons in the cerebellum, cerebral nuclei, and midbrain. Example, riding a bike. So, you know, we have to learn, right, how to ride a bike, but then we kind of get that pattern. I almost hate to use the word motor pattern, but we do get that pattern, that motor pathway, that, what's the word that I'm looking for? How we store it in our body, that, okay, this is how we do something. It's a very complex process, and we kind of dumb it down a lot. We're like, oh yeah, I just learned that one day and now it's just automatic. But a lot of times this is a complex unconscious motor pattern that we kind of store and control, and it's in this beautiful brain of ours. So that we can, like riding a bike, hop back on years later and still know how to do it. You hear my son in the background. He's obviously watching something fun, so excuse that. Or maybe you can laugh with me, one of the two. All right, so I'm going to stop here, because whenever we get into the higher order processing, I want to have a conversation about whys and all those good things. But I want to skip down in the hemispheric lateralization. This is why it crosses over in the brain. I want to do that in person as well. But let's talk about, we'll save a few things for later, but I want to talk about sleep, if you're okay with that. So just to cap this off, kind of make it a little bit more applied, a little bit more something that everyone does, which is sleep, right? Hopefully, maybe not enough, but we do get a couple of moments of should I, right? So during sleep, our brain activity, our brain patterns, it changes during the different sleep components, different aspects of our sleep cycle. Most of our sleep, it says 75 here, is non-REM. That means that activity is depressed, energy is conserved, growth and repair of the body tissues occurs. I've been diving into this as far as with sleep and recovery for like athletic performance, or say if you are a new mom and you are not getting a lot of sleep, how does that impact your functioning? Which, as one, I can say that it does impact your functioning, but also how it impacts your healing. And so this is sleep is an interesting one, just because there are 4 substages, of non-REM sleep before your REM sleep starts. So before you even get to that rapid eye movement, that really high, what we really, really want to get to type of sleep, that major sleep cycle, we have 4 substages to get through. Those are important. We don't want to skip those. Even though we want that rapid eye movement sleep, that nice, beautiful cycle during our sleep pattern, we still need these other ones just to regroup our energy and repair body tissues. Now let's talk about REM sleep. That's only 25% of our beautiful sleep cycles. We have our most memorable dreams during then. So if you wake up and some of the dreams we just really don't remember, maybe that happened earlier, but then the ones that, you know, you're like, you wake up and you're like, holy cow, that one was weird. That's usually happening during your REM sleep. So if you have that consistently, hey, guess what? You are getting great REM sleep. If you're one of those that you're like, I never dream or I never remember dreams, maybe you don't have as much REM sleep. We now have the technology where you can wear a watch and check that. So maybe do that, see how your sleep is. But this is useful for memory consolidation. And we need this time to, again, just kind of, I think of it as organizing your files in your brain. Just like any office needs some time where the administrative assistant goes through and organizes things because everybody's put stuff in a different location, or something's not alphabetized the way that it was, or something of that nature, your brain has to do that too. There's a lot of stuff going on in that brain of yours. So taking the time to kind of reconsolidate, reorganize, have that REM sleep to where you can absorb and repair, it's much needed. Now, our next to last slide is kind of a graph to look at the different cycles in sleep. Everybody, it's going to look different, but this is kind of a traditional brief one. And you'll notice here that there's a lot of, you know, hours in the night, but there's only little chunks of REM sleep that you'll find. And it'll vary. If you have kids, you might not get as much REM sleep. You might not get as much sleep in general. Or if you have a dog who wakes you up at night, you know, all those little things affect our sleep and affect those pathways in general, because you need this time to reconsolidate and to repair. These ones we probably know, but I'm just going to state them before we close out. Insomnia is a difficulty falling or staying asleep. Pregnancy insomnia is real, folks, but also I have to pee all the time, so that's probably it too. But not only does it happen during pregnancy, postpartum for women, it happens in every single person. And it's different factors affect insomnia. It could be everything from hormonal to pain receptors to, I mean, anything, chemical, like there's so many different things. But we all have probably experienced some time in our life where our mind will just not shut up. And we have difficulty falling asleep, or we constantly wake up. Sleep apnea refers to interruptions in breathing during sleep, often treated by a CPAP machine. So we've probably seen this as well. You probably have a family member, if not yourself, that has had sleep apnea. And it's literally where you stop breathing during your sleep. So you have to have a machine that basically forces air back into you so that you do not have those moments of breath holding or breath retention. This is important again for brain health. And it goes back into this conversation of pathways, because we need to breathe to feel those beautiful tissues, correct? So if we have those constant interruptions during our sleep, it is going to affect things like neural tissue and so much more. So always good to make sure that you have good sleeping habits and that you are getting enough sleep as much as you can. Sometimes that's unavoidable, but hey, we do what we can. I don't know what's going on back there. So that's all that we're going to talk about today. Almost an hour's worth of content. You're just hearing it right now because you're probably all driving, but hopefully that starts to kind of get you familiar with some of the words. Now, what I'm going to tell you right here is I want you to go home and look at some of these words. So you've heard them now. I want you to look at them. I want you to look at those pictures. Look at the pathways, because again, we're talking about pathways here. It's hard to understand pathways if you're not seeing them. And seeing them in those pictures that are in our slides will really, 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 really help. As you prepare for your lovely, beautiful practical on Wednesday, let's chat about that. Any questions before I dive into the practical? You can unmute yourself or do whatever you need to do. I'm guessing not, because everybody's like quiet, or you've all hung up on me, one of the two. I don't blame you. So let's talk about the practical. Let's talk about in-person practical first. So Wednesday, if we are in person, here's what it's going to look like. We're going to talk about that contralateral messaging pathway, those different pathways that cross across to discern and to talk about what's going on the opposite side. So what's happening in your right side is processed in that left side versus left side goes over to the right side of the brain to process and do all this wonderful work. We'll talk about that next time. And then also we'll talk about the autonomic nervous system. Now I have a couple of handouts for you on that one because sometimes it's a little bit hard to grasp. And this one's hard to grasp too. So take your time with it. Make some note cards. I want you to prepare tonight, tomorrow, for just those things that we talked about in our review. Stuff like, okay, what's the different aspects of a femur? Yeah, a femur. That's a new bone, y'all. So what are the different aspects, the different features on a femur bone? I told you specifically that I will not test you on the carpals, the little bones in your wrists, and then the tarsals, those little bones in your feet. I am still going to test you on everything else. However, that takes away that complex structure, okay? So in person, basically what's going to happen, yes, Shannon, like I said at the very, very beginning, I will let you know before noon on Wednesday, I will let you know. My goal is actually to update you tomorrow if I hear anything, okay? You will know something by Wednesday because either I will just call it and I'll be like, hey, it's virtual. That will just make everything simpler. Or I'll be like, okay, we're going to just write it out until Wednesday morning, which my OCD brain does not want to do. But I'm trying to give us the benefit of the doubt just because in-person practicals are better. You just, it's an experience. You need to have those experiences in the setting so that if you have grad school to look forward to, it's not a shock, okay? So what we'll do whenever we walk into the lab at, say, 7 o'clock, what we'll do is we'll go through, I'll kind of set you up in stations. I will have a piece of paper that you can fill out. It'll have some numbers and some lines, and you just have to write down the name of what you see. You guys will spread out. I'll set a timer on my phone, and every 30 seconds we'll rotate. It might take you less than 30 seconds. It might take you longer. But what we're going to do is we're just going to rotate on the dot every 30 seconds, okay? If you have a couple that you want to revisit after we've gone all the way through, I'll say, okay, how many of you have one that you want to revisit? You'll raise your hand and you'll go find that section. Now, if that particular place is something that somebody else wanted to see as well, maybe you have another one that you need to go see as well, or you need to wait, or you go first. We'll determine that as we go. But I don't want two people at the same station, okay? As you go through, once you're done and you're like, okay, I've given it all I can and I'm ready to turn it in, you'll just turn it in there, up there by me, and you'll go home. Relax. Rest your mind, because you'll need to after it. I will be there for questions, but I will tell you, I'm not going to give you the answer. I can clarify on what it's pointing to, but I'm not going to be like, oh yeah, you're right. Okay, this is a test. You're in college, okay? So just go through and remember with spelling, I just want your best phonics sounding out that you can do. Now, tibia versus fibula, right? We had that conversation. If I can't tell between the T and F, then I'm probably going to mark it wrong. So make sure that you're not trying to just make something work. Okay, try to give me your best guess and stick with it. Okay, be confident in your answer. Any questions about that practical? Like I say, you will be done. Once you're done, you're done. Alrighty, well, you guys, thanks for bearing with me. I told you that this might happen and that we'd have to be flexible. You guys were awesome. I appreciate, I'm sorry that some of you had to go other places and that you got there and then it's a long drive home, but this just protects you, protects me, also just the liability of the school. And so that's kind of why I erred on the side of caution with that. That way, you know, we're not sitting in a room for an hour. So, all right, well, you guys, I'm gonna let you go. I'm gonna stop recording this. I will upload this on to YouTube so you can go